Salam alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage His Excellency, Mr. Zayed bin Rashid Al Zayani, Minister of Industry, Commerce and Tourism of the Kingdom of Bahrain.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency, Sheikh Khalid bin Abdullah Al Khalifa, Deputy Prime Minister, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you all for joining us today at the official launch of the Global Entrepreneurs Congress 2019 in the Kingdom of Bahrain. In 2008, His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa launched Economic Vision 2030 with its core fundamentals built around sustainability, fairness, and competitiveness. The vision focused on transforming our economy from one that is predominantly oil-based to a more robust, conducive, diversified, and globally competitive economy propelled by a solid partnership between the public and private sectors. 10 years later, our economy is 80% driven by the private sector. The oil and gas sector contributes to less than 1/4 of our GDP, and the average Bahraini household income has grown to 50%. With the vision well on its track, the government of Bahrain, led by the Prime Minister, His Royal Highness Prince Khalifa bin Salman Al Khalifa, has continued to reinforce its programs and amend legislation to further bolster the position of Bahrain in attracting more investments. We overhauled our commercial law, our commercial registration law, and our companies law to make registering a business less cumbersome and more affordable. We streamlined our regulation and the number of government agencies involved in the approval process to lessen the time and the burden on starting a new business, therefore making the process easier and more affordable. We introduced technology, transforming all our application processes to digital through our online registration portal, Sijillat, originally launched in 2016, and with its enhanced version of Sijillat 2.0 launched 2 years later. Our next frontier was to create the ideal ecosystem to encourage SMEs and startups, primarily from Bahrain, but also to attract talent from all over the world to be based in Bahrain. The aim was to convert the population's mindset, especially our youth, from being job seekers to being job creators. It was necessary to create a focal point to drive SME development further, in line with our aspirations. It is with that in mind that His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the Crown Prince, Deputy Supreme Commander, and First Deputy Prime Minister, established the SME Development Board in 2017, with its first mandate being the development of a national strategy for SME sector. The result was a clear 5-year strategy spanning up to 2023, which included 3 major objectives achievable through 17 initiatives, addressing 5 strategic goals, being the access to finance, access to markets, streamlining business development, fostering skill development, and fostering innovation. This has now become our compass and has not only helped us in identifying SME development obstacles, but more so putting in place concrete actions to eradicate them. Allow me to share with you but a few of the initiatives we have put in place to serve this strategy. We have introduced accelerators and incubators regulation, which did not previously exist, And today, we are proud to have more than 650 startups amongst them. We launched the first sandbox environment in the region in FinTech Bay and managed to attract talent from all over the world to be located within its premises. We revised our bankruptcy law, introducing a restructuring chapter, thereby introducing a long-awaited safety net. We launched Export Bahrain to encourage our SME sector to look for opportunities beyond the local and regional markets. We have committed to 20% of government annual purchases to be from the SME sector and built in a 10% price advantage in their bids. We have established Bahrain Investment Market, an alternative market on our bourse to list smaller cap companies with much relaxed listing rules, as well as the new crowdfunding regulation and 100 million Al-Waha fund of funds aimed towards investing in startups as a means to facilitate access to public funding. These are just a few steps taken in the last 24 months to support and cultivate this sector, and much more are in the pipeline. Later today, we shall witness the signing of a deal between Export Bahrain and our national carrier Gulf Air, in which Bahraini SMEs shall be eligible to up to 40% discounts on cargo fares. In closing, allow me to draw your attention to the fact that hosting such a global conference in Bahrain at this time does not come as a coincidence. It is a testament to the government of Bahrain's core belief in the importance of the SME sector and a statement of our commitment to its importance in our economic landscape. In closing, I would like to thank Global Entrepreneurs Network for their trust in awarding the 2019 Congress to Bahrain, as well as the delegates and participants who have joined us for this event. I also wish to thank all the organizers, volunteers, and staff from the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism and Tamkeen, who have worked tirelessly for the last year in producing this event. And last but not least, wish you all safe travels back home and best of fortunes in your future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Shukran, Your Excellency. We'd now like to invite Bahraini stakeholders for a discussion on pioneering policies, innovation, and globally connected startup ecosystem. Joining Minister Al-Zayani, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Isa Al Khalifa, Chairman of Tamkeen. His Excellency Hamid Al Rumahi, CEO of the Economic Development Board of Bahrain. Sonia Janahi, founder of Maila Chocolaterie, and Hala Suleiman, co-founder of Al Rahi. And as moderator, Jonathan Ortmans, president and founder of the Global Entrepreneurship Network.
Well, I think I would like to begin this morning with thanking you very much and acknowledging Your Excellencies for this extraordinary opportunity to join with you and be part of your goal and mission in developing Bahrain's entrepreneurial and SME capacity, and to congratulate you on the great progress to date that has been achieved. And I think on behalf of all the 170 countries represented here today, I know I would like to take the opportunity before we begin our discussion to thank the leadership of this great country for your hospitality and for inviting us to join with you in this great journey. So thank you very much indeed. You know, I would like to, if I could, begin in following up on Minister Al-Zayani's comments just now about the progress that's been made here following the 2017 strategy. And one of the things that we noticed is it had a very clear set of definitive goals, strategies and objectives. And we would, on the national level, I would like to, if I could, turn to you first and ask a little bit, what are the most urgent priorities of the ones that you've outlined on the national level? You know, how does the government enact these SME and entrepreneurship policies going forward? Which are going to be the most urgent priorities that we're going to be focusing on?
I think there isn't one magical solution or one right answer for that, because we're trying to develop an ecosystem and there are many angles to it. And to have the system complete, we have to work simultaneously on legislation, on procedures, on regulation. I think one of the challenges is genuinely to change the mindset from being job seekers to job providers, to allow or to encourage the SMEs to be more risk takers, to take an opportunity, to gamble, really. And in order to do that, this is why we listed access to capital as a priority. This is why we introduced a new bankruptcy law to give a safety net. This is why we have the various schemes of funding through Tamkeen. We have to create a system for them where they can take an idea and convert it into a reality. So I don't see as one challenge, it's many things, but the plan is quite clear on where we want to go. We want to expand exports of Bahraini goods and services. Today they are 8% of our total exports. We have a target to grow them to 20% by 2023. We want to increase the number of Bahrainis employed in the SME sector from 36,000 to 43,000 in the same period. And we want Bahrainis to be encouraged to start their businesses amongst themselves or with partners from other countries, or also open up Bahrain for others to come and use the ecosystem available to launch it out of Bahrain.
Well, it's quite clear when we look at the history of your transformation as an economy. I mean, this is where, you know, oil began. This is the sort of original nation in this region that began on this endeavor of diversifying your economy, and the data you've shown us is that you really achieved that. And I think for most of the world, it's inspiring to see that we're in this next generation of moving into innovation and moving into this entrepreneurial culture. One of the, if I could, like to turn to Tamkeen, if I can, a little bit, and talk a little bit, if I could, to the chairman here for a sense of Tamkeen's done 300 programs, as I understand, in terms of focusing on funding and skills and career progression in this regard. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're learning in this effort? You've done customized employment schemes. You've been able to work on more entrepreneurship exposure to the public. But in this new journey and moving into a more sophisticated innovation ecosystem, what are some of the lessons that you're learning in terms of how to increase national productivity and value addition?
Thank you, Jonathan. It's to be, if we take a step back, our and the minister referred to it, our economic vision launched in 2008 had many things, but a couple of the principles was how to make the private sector the sector of choice for Bahrainis, and how to make Bahrainis the employees of choice to employers. And with that in mind, I think for us, we've tried to work to complete the ecosystem, as the minister mentioned, and be responsive. So we've had a large number of programs because that's what the private sector asked for. And I think our strength has been to try to be responsive to the needs of the private sector and evolve our programs. So we've done many, but we will continue to evolve and try new things. So whether it's skills trainings or upskilling and giving people the opportunity to improve their skills, or looking at the whole entrepreneur ecosystem from funding to mentorship and all of the non-financial services. So it's I think if there's one thing you cannot stop, business moves, and I think we have to be responsive to what the private sector. We are lucky enough, we're funded by funds from the private sector, and therefore we have to serve the private sector in the best manner. So we just will continue to be responsive and work to improve. We've achieved a lot. We've reached over almost 200,000 Bahrainis. We've served over 50,000 businesses. We've spent over $2 billion in grants. We've provided over $1 billion in low-interest loans. But that to me is the past. More important is, my question, or what I'm looking for, to be honest, from this event is, what new ideas can we learn from all of you, from the 170 countries that we have here today, and how can we let Bahrainis benefit from that and reach abroad and learn from them? So to me, this is more of a learning experience.
Yeah, wonderful. While we're talking about Tamkeen briefly, though, in that context of reaching out to the international audience, can you give us a sense of, you've described the role that Tamkeen's playing in terms of programs and all of these areas, but in terms of how can Tamkeen partner on an international basis? So looking, what are some of the things that you can engage the international community in?
Well, and maybe Khalid Rumahi can talk about this, but our mandate in a way forces us to focus on Bahrain. So there has to be a link to Bahrain or Bahrainis. But attracting companies to come and set up in Bahrain and access this market is a prime opportunity. Having Bahraini companies go abroad and partner with other companies around the world. Over dinner last night, hopefully we'll establish and look to see how we can grow in South Africa through a contact I had last night. And so to me, this is the benefit of these events, is how to network, grow, find opportunities, create links. So allowing Bahrainis to grow abroad, which is one of our, but also by having international companies come and take advantage of the business environment we have here.
Yep. Well, I would like, if possible, to, if I could, as you mentioned, to move on to Khalid, we could talk a little bit about this. So maybe you can give us your perspective. I think you're talking to an audience that is converted in terms of the importance of startups, but why are startups, in your view, so important to the Middle East?
Well, first of all, good morning. It's a delight to be here on the panel. I think if we look at the Middle East and look at a major issue that all of the countries in the Middle East face, it's an employment challenge. And creating jobs is a priority for every country in the Middle East. If you talk to any leader or government decision maker, that's probably going to be top of their list. So if we look at startups, I think there are three benefits that startups bring to any economy. The first is employment generation. And so just by virtue of a small business growing, you're going to create faster growth, faster jobs than a more established business. But also the types of jobs that startups are going to create. If you look at companies that we've seen set up in Bahrain, some are in the technology business, some are in the bricks and mortars. The technology business is employing system developers, data scientists. These are high-value jobs. These are high-salary jobs, desirable by our nationals. So not only the job creation, but the types of jobs that we're seeing from startups are extremely interesting for any economy. Second element is dynamism. I think that if you look at the S&P 500 in the United States 20 years ago and compare it to the S&P 500 today, you're going to see a vast difference. You're going to see companies like Microsoft, Amazon, you name it, Google. These were startups. These were small businesses that emerged to introduce dynamism to that economy. And I think our economies in the Middle East need to develop that same dynamism that comes through competition and that comes through new businesses that emerge and that create new business models. So I think startups offer that second benefit, is that introduction of dynamism into our economies. When we look at Careem, just bought by Uber, look at that new business, look at the dynamism it introduced in transport. And so I think that's the second benefit. The third benefit is innovation. I think if you're in the retail business, if you're in the banking business, whatever business you're in, you're going to want to think about how you adapt your business model to a technology-led global situation, a global economy. And I think you're going to need to involve that dynamism and that innovation by looking at startups. So when we look at fintech, for instance, and we look at Bahrain Fintech Bay that we have here in Bahrain, a lot of the participants are banks because they're worried about how is fintech going to disrupt their business model. So I think the innovation that startups bring, and by the way, banks will import that innovation either through acquisition or by having that innovation in partnerships with these firms. So I think that's the third element, is innovation and what it can bring to an economy.
Wonderful. Well, Khaled, I'm going to ask you to pick what you think is the most important thing that a startup needs to be successful, or maybe the first two, because then I'm going to turn to some of our entrepreneurs and ask them to give their perspective on what are some of the things that they think they'd like to aspire to work with our international community this week in finding solutions to that are challenges, that there's a vision set. But what do you think of in your understanding of the most important thing that startups, particularly here in Bahrain, need in order to be successful?
Well, I'm going to reflect what I've heard startups themselves say.
Okay.
We were in the Dead Sea just a week ago, and before that, every conversation that I've had with the startup business, the number one issue has been access to markets. We, as the Middle East, still have the GCC is a great example of how you break down barriers amongst markets. But still, if you're a business sitting in the UAE, or you're a business sitting in Bahrain or in Saudi Arabia, as you look to scale, as you look to expand, you're almost having to recreate a new business as you move to another market. We still have trade friction in terms of movement of goods and services between our markets. I think what the minister mentioned about Export Bahrain is a great initiative to try to ease that scaling of businesses. I think we need to look at services, and we will, not just goods and transport of goods, but access to market. How can businesses sitting in Egypt scale to go to Tunisia, go to Saudi Arabia? We say we're 300 million people, approximately a market size of $2 trillion, but that is not a seamless movement. If you look at an entrepreneur in California, he's able to scale in a much easier way to the East Coast than an entrepreneur sitting in Egypt. Second element, and I think that's being addressed right now, is capital. Now, in Bahrain, we've created not only a fund of funds that will help introduce venture capital, but also through Tamkeen, numerous grants and assistance that we're providing to entrepreneurs. So I think Bahrain has addressed that. And by the way, it's not just capital, it's smart capital. It's an investment that also comes with advice. And I think that is still a challenge. We have a tremendous amount of wealth in the region. Now we're seeing the region redirect that wealth internally to entrepreneurs. And I think it's a welcome change in tide for the region.
Great. Well, I think as we all know, the concept of capital is a very broad one. First of all, I'm very glad to hear that it's not the first one that you mentioned, because usually, we get, when we ask entrepreneurs, what's your biggest challenges, and they come up with access to capital, often we know a little bit that sometimes it's not always capital. But let's come up to the capital situation and work out. So, of course, there's lots of different kinds of capital, as you just alluded to. And if I could, I'd like to ask Sonia if you could discuss this a little bit, because obviously, for those of you that don't know, Sonia has created the first franchise brand, I think, in Bahrain. And you can tell us a little bit about your company, by the way. Everyone here loves to tell stories. But I'd like to ask you a little bit about specifically where is the capital challenge for you in growing your company? Because we all know that there's startup capital, and we all know that there's big institutional venture capital, but often what we're finding around the world is there's a gap. There seems to be a period of time before you've actually achieved that established role in the marketplace. So tell us a little bit about your experience, and is capital an issue for you? Maybe I've misinterpreted that. So.
First of all, good morning all, and thank you for this interesting panel. I'm Sonia Janahi. I've created a brand in Bahrain called Maila Chocolaterie, which was an investment decision to create a diversified strategy from real estate to going into chocolate and having a diversification plan. But at the same time, because of my investment background, while I was working at a bank, I managed to create the concept to be the first franchise model coming out of Bahrain and with the aim of going global. We launched the brand in 2007. It was the first chocolate factory in Bahrain. And the target was not just to create or make chocolate, but create chocolate for a better world, focusing on a healthy concept of no additives, no preservatives, but still having a shelf life of 7 months, and ensuring that we have no sugar components added and as low as possible cocoa butter. So it's still chocolate, but you can still enjoy it without worrying about too much calories. Going forward, it's 11 years now that we've started the brand, and we did franchise it to several countries in the region very successfully. And we franchised it in exactly 3 months from opening the door, because we were ready with all the manuals, we were ready with the franchise agreements, we knew exactly what our vision was, where we want to be, and how to proceed. And eventually, of course, our objective has always been from day one to take Maya to IPO. But in the interim, with the changes happening globally, economically, it affected our strategy, and we had to adapt to ensure that we move along with what's happening globally, whether regionally around us or globally. And one of the challenges we had was the company ready to go to IPO, or shall we in turn create a rights offering opportunity to ensure that we expand globally? The challenge of attracting capital to the company, regardless of the company having positive financials or having a stable strategy, has been very difficult. It's a very tough challenge. I'm not sure if it is trust in a brand coming out of this region is one point, or the fact that we lack venture capital institutions here that would invest in a company at a growth stage that has potential to grow further. This is the challenges that we've been facing, and it's quite tough. And going global, to go global, you definitely need capital, but also you need that venture capital mindset that would invest in the founders who have passion for the concept. You can't have venture capital institutions that would inject money into an organization and then micromanage the organization from a financial institution. It has to be a two-way directive. It has to be a joint effort between both the venture capital institution and the founders to ensure that the brand goes global.
Well, absolutely, and I think as was mentioned earlier, you know, the smart capital, but there's also being a smart entrepreneur. So we understand this. Hala, you've got a tech startup, but you've also had a consultancy background in this sense. Do you share this view that's been expressed from the capital perspective?
I totally agree with Sonia. I think I've been lucky. I have 2 businesses, one which is a consultancy, which is, I may call it under the traditional business setup. And I also have a tech startup co-founded with 2 of my colleagues. And what we find interesting is people need to believe in the new digital businesses, the new tech startups happening, trying to also get business through B2 government and B2B, where they can actually rely on the local tech startups that are happening in Bahrain and in the region. I think we've been very lucky because we've set up what I would call the golden years when it comes to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I mean, we have here 3 decision makers who are actually working with us in developing and changing policies and programs that actually help the various sectors and the various startups in the various sectors. In our case, as a tech startup, for the benefit of the audience, we're a social media network-based digital platform for audiobooks. Our focus is Arabic content, and it's been great because it's a digital service, so we are across the borders automatically. The 2 things I think would be very important for us as startups is looking at educating investors locally, regionally, on the importance of investing in tech startups and how to invest in them, and also educating us as startups. The other issue I think as well is how do you scale as a tech startup? You're already across borders, as they say, crossing the digital divide, but how do you also grow further? We've been working with partners, we've been working with corporates, we've been working with airlines to try to get our message across. Our message is to try to promote culture, promote reading using technology. So it's not the standard consumable technology base. It's not clothes, it's not consumer product, it's not food, which is easily sellable items. We're actually selling knowledge.
So let's talk about this aspect of the difficulty you mentioned to do. Both of you hinted at the fact that was there a difficulty because you were a Bahrain startup, either in terms of attracting the right kind of capital or in terms of, as you said, market access? And are there any ideas that you want to express in front of an international audience about how we address that? One of the things that happened in the ministerial yesterday was that a couple of the researchers that were making presentations were suggesting that with some data that sometimes a collaborative team that might have multiple international members on the team was more likely to get over some of the stigmas and barriers which sometimes could be faced because, I don't know, in some parts of the world it was because, you know, they were a female-owned startup. Sometimes in other parts of the world there were other factors that were creating barriers for them. And is that something that you've thought about, and is it a good question for us to ask in the context of an international community? We have many people that are doing connections between we call it ecosystem tourism. So this is great today because we've got the ultimate ecosystem tourism. We're all going to have a deep understanding of Bahrain's entrepreneurial ecosystems, its strengths, but also the challenges that the international community can face. So you know, how much of this, doing this together with other ecosystems is you think that's an effective idea, or is there a better one?
I think this is a great opportunity because this is a platform where we can clearly define the business opportunities that are available in Bahrain. And being in Bahrain is a bonus. And I'm not saying this because I'm Bahraini. This is reality. This is fact. Having an organization like Tamkeen, supporting, having the ease of setting up a company. I personally went through Sijili a few weeks ago and set up a new company, and it was so simple, so direct, so easy online. While I'm at my office, it took me less than an hour to finalize it. So the ease of doing business in Bahrain and having an organization like Tamkeen hold our hands, support us, give us grants, give us financing, give us mentorships, directions, is a bonus for us to test and try the business models that we have. The next stage, of course, is to be ready to go to the next level and globalize. And definitely having a platform like this opens opportunities for us, for the global market to understand concepts that are actually generating out of Bahrain, which have been tried, which have been tested, and you have a track record to deliver and to prove what you can do and where you can go further with it.
I think it may sound a bit an easy sell, but we actually have it all in Bahrain. We do have everything starting from the consultancy to the financing, to the legal, to the governmental framework, but I think there's always opportunity for development and change. And I think what's important is if we have the reassurance that these changes will happen based on our continuous consultations, the various setups, whether through the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, or whether through the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is called like Startup Bahrain, Tamkeen, similar forums as the Congress. I think we do have it all. We just need to know how to make the best out of it as individuals. We have to have this initiative. As well, we have to have the flexibility and open door policy continue.
Well, I'd like to...
That you will, I can assure you.
I'd like to give any of you the opportunity to respond to what our entrepreneurs said. You know, one of the things that when we look at the challenges that other economies face in becoming entrepreneurial nations, we see considerably more challenges, frankly, than you have here in Bahrain. I mean, you're actually the sort of the original entrepreneurs from this region in many respects. As you capture this next generation. One of the things we experience around the world, we're going to hear from the former president of Estonia tomorrow, for example, here at this conference. We've got representatives here from Singapore, and I could list another 10 economies that are actually quite small. And for us, as scientists in this field, it's fascinating to see that actually Bahrain has, from our international perspective, an advantage of being a relatively small economy in your ability to make this process work. Is that a competitive advantage to you, whether within the GCC or globally in your point of view, or do you think is that a challenge?
If I'll jump in here. It is an advantage. Our size allows us to move faster. Having said that, the complexities of any policymaker are the same. So we have the same trade-offs. But the fact that we know each other, and if in Bahrain, you know, pretty much if you don't know somebody directly, you know somebody who does. So you can get to the decision makers and resolve issues sooner. Decisions aren't necessarily easy because, as I said, the trade-offs are the same, but we have been able to respond. And to your points, you know, I like to say we are early adopters in globalization. We've been doing it for 4,000 years. You know, the Dilmun civilization was a trading port between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. So we've literally had people coming and going for millennia. So this is not something new, but we just have to continue to innovate.
If I may add to that, I think Hala pointed out something quite unique, is that we, or the startup community, have to take advantage of what is available. I go back to the mindset. I'm not worried about the economy of Bahrain because throughout history we've managed to transform. And we've had many milestones. This year we celebrate 100 years of formal education and medical services. Like you said, we discovered oil first. We realized that we had to diversify. We started the aluminum industry in the 60s. We went into banking into the 70s. We went into Islamic banking in the 80s, and we deregulated telecoms at the beginning of the century. The next milestone in our economy is to empower the SME sector and startup community. And for that to happen, it takes two to tango. They also have to seize the opportunity, and they have to change the mindset. I still think that socially, in this part of the world, we still believe that I'd rather own 100% of something small than own 50% of something that's 10 times bigger. Mm-hmm. And this is why we don't see an active capital market in this part of the world, or venture capital, because on the one hand, those with ideas and businesses are reluctant to let go of ownership, and on the other hand, we don't have as much financiers as you would have in the developed world. So this is why we introduced new products on the bourse, like the Bahrain investment market. It's a market aimed at smaller cap, less rigorous in listing rules, and we're trying to encourage the notion of public funding. Own something, co-own it with somebody, but give yourself the chance to expand rather than continue to grasping onto it until you suffocate and your idea may not continue.
I see time is
Yes,
up. Let me
I want
jump
to,
in really quickly.
Please, I want you to, yes.
You know, I think entrepreneurs have everything they need here. They really have, through Tamkeen, the ministry, the various entities, there's a lot of support. And this is a fast-moving, agile system, and there's a history of entrepreneurship in this country. And there are great role models. I mean, you know, Sonia has built a great business that has expanded beyond the borders of Bahrain. I think Hala won the Prince's Trust here in Bahrain and was awarded the People's Choice in the UK. So these are successful role models, and that are women that have built their businesses. I think what you need is resilience. I think this country offers a wonderful environment to pilot an idea, because it's the same citizens that are similar to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and if you can succeed here, you have a template that you can take and scale. So I think this country offers, what we need obviously is to help them scale. And we need to be able to allow Sonia to take her concept and help her to grow to neighboring markets. And it's a struggle at times. I think what I've heard is they need more help to grow from here. But this is a great starting point. We have wonderful entrepreneurs that have built businesses here and that through, frankly, a lot of effort have scaled. We need to help make that easier.
Wonderful. I'd like to invite each of you, as we wrap up the panel as our closing, if you would just like, if there's one thing you'd like to emphasize, if I could, either something that you celebrate joyously about Bahrain's entrepreneurial environment, or if it's a challenge you want to issue to the international audience. Just a final comment, if I could, from each of you, and we could just come down. So maybe if we could, we'll start at the other end. So, Sonia.
There's so many you can say by being in Bahrain, honestly. You can't sum it up in one word, but Bahrain is definitely a country that you can make your dream, your passion come true, and this is a reality. It's a reality fact. And one more thing I want to add to what Mr. Zayani added is definitely we need to change the entrepreneur mindset, that it is very important to have something small of a bigger organization rather than focusing on having 100% of a smaller organization that might go nowhere. And this is a very important policy that every entrepreneur needs to consider seriously. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think from my side, I like to always talk about our startup. I call it Born in Bahrain, with an Arab identity and with a global reach out. And we're here in the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which is being held in Bahrain for the very first time, and hopefully not the last time. And what we'd like to call out to all investors here to come and check out our application and invest in it, because this is your opportunity. Bahrain is open for business, and it's business friendly.
Wonderful.
So I'm going to plug my institution.
Please do.
So the Economic Development Board is here to welcome investors to this country. And we have a team dedicated to startups. So I would invite people in this room to understand the wonderful ecosystem we have here for startups, and to reach out to the team that when you see them, they're the EDB. We have a wonderful lady called Pakiza who runs our startup team. Let us help you discover this ecosystem and help set up here. And we'd love to have you as part of our entrepreneurial system here.
And sorry, I'll jump ahead. And hopefully when you do, Tamkeen will be here to help.
Ali, you stole my line. This is Team Bahrain. And it's something that sprung out not by strategy, not by design, but by passion. It is something that was born in Bahrain to promote Bahrain. And it will continue. We're all very proud to be members of this team. And when I say Team Bahrain, I don't mean the government. Everyone who contributes to Bahrain is part of Team Bahrain. So whether it's the private sector or the public sector or investors from abroad, I think we've managed to succeed to create a perfect working relationship where we listen to each other and where we work together to take out any differences in the way to make the system work for everybody involved. And a lot of the progress that has been achieved by us as government officials, I can speak for myself, is credited to the community of SMEs and startups and the private sector, because we learn. My first meeting as a minister back in 2014 was with the SME Society, and that was designed by intention to show that this is a sector we want to focus on and we want to grow. So we will continue to do that, and I'm sure Team Bahrain will deliver more success in the future.
Wonderful. Well, great. Well, since this is our only opportunity together on stage together, I just want to quickly tell the international community that each of our relationships between Jen and each of these great institutions, I visited every one of their facilities and spent some time with each of them, began a year ago. It began as a relationship to understand Bahrain, to understand how our community as a global community can work with not just your entrepreneurs, but with the leaders in your ecosystem. And I can tell you, since we have the great privilege of observing this public-private partnership all over the world, this is possibly, I would say, maybe or one of the most functional levels of cooperation and efficiency. As you heard in the opening remarks, there's a very clearly laid out plan. They've dealt with everything from bankruptcy legislation to what are the different kinds of investment capital. When I look at the history of the programs within Bahrain, within Tamkeen alone, for example, I observed a great deal of change that occurs. If it's not adapting correctly, they've been adjusting and introducing new programs. I know since I was here, it was at 200 programs, and then they'd increased it to 300 programs. So I want to encourage the international community to, over the course of this week, to spend some time with the leaders here in this ecosystem, because I think you will have a lot to learn, but I think there could also be a great deal of value to all of us as we look to help enable our entrepreneurs. And I'll say one last thing that we just want to credit Bahrain for. In many of our ecosystems, our biggest weakness, funny enough, is the fighting between all the individuals and organizations and programs and institutions and governments. And I have to say, maybe it's through the leadership of the Crown Prince and the Prime Minister, but we have really been greatly honored to see such great cooperation among all of your individuals and institutions. It seems like it's more of a family. As you say, if you need to know someone, the worst case scenario is 1 degree of separation. But that's true in entrepreneurship. We look for density and we look for connectivity, and that's what we think creates innovation and activity. So certainly we want to congratulate you on this, and challenge all of those from the international community that are new to your ecosystem to take this conversation further, of course, of the next week, and to join in helping to increase the number of entrepreneurs, frankly, that are taking advantage of the great work you're doing in creating an enabling environment for you. So on behalf of, maybe you can all join me in thanking our panel, but also thanking Bahrain for this extraordinary opportunity. So thank you.
Shukran for a very informative and valuable conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're pleased to welcome our keynote speaker for this morning, Jonas Schellberg, co-founder of Skype.
Everyone, thank you. I'm super happy to be here. Great pleasure. I'll see if I can put my computer up here. So, great to be here, and thank you for having me. So, I'm Jonas Schellberg. I had, as you heard, the great pleasure of showing up at the right time at a small company called Joltid that later became Skyper. But what am I more? I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm an investor. I'm an author. I've started quite a lot of different companies. I had the great opportunity to invest in a company called Namshi here, which actually sold shoes on the internet. We raised quite a lot of money for Namshi, and when I was around in the region trying to raise even more money, they looked at me very skeptical and said, Jonas, you're selling shoes on the internet. But you know, every sane human being knows you have to try the shoes on before you can buy them. So this is a stupid idea. Well, it turned out to be okay anyway. I also invested in a company called Zalando, now listed at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. I invested in a company called HelloFresh, also listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Home24, also now listed. West Wing, also now listed. I invested in a company called Avito, largest classified service in Russia. I'm also, beside my investments perspective, I've also had the great opportunity to be in the digital board of the IKEA group. So I've also been trying to figure out how do you work with a larger company. And I also work with the Boston Consulting Group as one of the advisors. And besides all of that, I've started nearly 50 different companies, which has been great fun. But let's be honest, most of these companies have not been successful. I started a company called Player.io, Nanuba, and Kenetworks. I sold all of these companies to Yahoo. So if you're an entrepreneur out there and have a company that is not working out, call Yahoo. Because with a bit of persuasion, they will buy everything, I promise. So basically, that's been my life. But as you hear, my life has always been, how do you change the game? How do you take a perfectly working business model and destroy it? That's my passion. That's why I get out of bed. Is there anything great that is making a lot of money that I can destroy? So let's take it on. And if this would be a normal lecture, I'd be standing here and talking a lot about my successes. But I'm not. For the next 40 minutes, I'm going to spend all the time and energy talking about all my failures. Because let's be honest, if you look at my CV, it looks quite successful, but I'll tell you it's not. Because with all successes comes a numerous amount of failures. I wasted more money than anyone can think of. I've started more companies that have gone in bankruptcy. So I'm going to take you through a journey of epic, miserable failures through my life. That's how it is, you know, you don't know how to do things, you know, you can always go out there and try, and that's what I've done quite a lot. But I also have very strong opinions about things I have no clue about. You in the future, you are starting new companies, you have much more knowledge than I have. So please interrupt me, say I'm wrong, let's get the dialogue going. So maybe we should start with a question. Is it the big companies that beat the small, or is it the fast that beat the slow? Anyone? You're awfully quiet with so many educated people. It's not that difficult question, is it? Fast that beat the slow? Fast, yes. Big that beat the small? Okay, hands up for fast that beat the slow. Cool. Hands up for the big that beat the small. Only 2-3 hands, some hands coming up. This has always been my problem, because when I've lost, I've always lost to the big, because I thought my life has always been, it's the fast that beat the slow. But when I lose, it's because the big crush me. And I was like super confused. Once I could start a company like Skype, we exited, great success, start something else, and I'm crushed by the incumbents. So this puzzled me. So after a while, I had the opportunity to go to Stanford and start teaching, because I needed to figure out, why was I sometimes successful and why was I sometimes just a big failure? So I went there and I started lecturing. How many have been to Stanford here? A lot of people, cool. But you should, the ones that haven't been there, you should really go. It's a brilliant place. And I went and I started lecturing. But after a while, my professor, Tom Kosnick, he came up to me and said, Jonas, We're wondering if you would like some feedback. We have some feedback from the faculty. And I'm like, oh no. I don't know how it is with you, but when someone asks me if I want feedback, it's always negative. And then I'm thinking, my mind is racing, I'm thinking, maybe I should give Stanford some feedback. That's maybe a great, brilliant idea. But then you're like, no, I'm happy to have some feedback. And then said, Jonas, you know, the students love you, we really enjoy you here, you're super provocative, you have really strong ideas and thoughts. There is only one little slight challenge we have. Okay, what is that? We have noticed you haven't read the literature you're teaching about. Shit, you know, how many have read these American management literature books? You can buy them at airports. They're like 500 pages long, no picture, super boring. I thought, you know, you read the first chapters, you get the theory, you read the summary, you know. Can't be that difficult. But I had to sit down and read all of these books, every page of it. And I came to the same conclusion. Most of these books are actually shit boring. Why do we read them at all? So I went to Tom and said, Tom, you know, why don't we write a book? You know, you've been teaching at Harvard, you've been doing great things, but you've never really written a book. So why don't we write a book? And he said, that's a great idea. I said, let's do it. And we set off, but I said, if we want to write a book, I want to do it my way. And he was a bit skeptical, but said, no, let's do it my way. And let's write a book that is 100 pages long and half has to be pictures. I'll tell you, he was not utterly convinced. I said, this is what the world needs. So we set off. We wrote the book, and when we were done, we sent it to his former colleagues at Harvard. What do you think they said when they saw this book? Brilliant? Yes, that was what I was thinking. Magical, you know, all the American expressions. No, that's not what they said. They were more like, oh, Tom, this is so sweet. You've made a children's book. And Tom was devastated. And he said, Jonas, we have to cancel the book, you know, this is my reputation, I'm gonna die, you know, we can't launch it. And I'm like, Tom, what do 30 Harvard professors know about writing books? He's like, a lot. And I'm like, okay, but Tom, they just don't understand my brilliance. It happens all the time. Don't worry, it's going to be all right. So I said, let's go talk to the publishers in the world. You know, the people that really understand publishing books. So I went around and I met all the biggest publishing houses. What do you think they said when they saw this book? Sweet. Children's department is down the hall, Mr. Kjellberg. I was a successful entrepreneur. I'd done a lot of things. No one wanted to publish my book. And I thought, okay, interesting, but you know, how hard is it to publish a book? You know, print it on paper and you start selling it on Amazon. So I did. And since I was pissed with the whole industry, I went back and I wrote another book. And this book has only pictures. Basically, you all. Now there's a green book published by Wiley, one of the most prestigious publishing houses in the world, translated to 16 languages. Why do you think they would call me back and ask to publish the same book? Yes, greed. Because the interesting thing, when things sell, they were very fast and adaptive. They're very academic, rigid standards to also include pictures books. So, what's the book about? The book is about the 9 different gears you need to be successful. I'm not going to take all the different gears today. I'm going to talk about customer acquisition, business model, and delight. But basically, this is a framework that was developed at Harvard nearly 30 years ago. And this is where my journey started. It actually started with customer acquisition. I had the great joy of starting working for a big investment firm in Sweden just after my graduation as a CEO assistant. And as a CEO assistant, you cook coffee, you repark cars, you do a shitload of PowerPoints. We bought a couple of companies, we IPO'd 2 companies, and what's still tradition in this company is that after this first year, you should become the CEO of one of the subsidiaries. And I think, you know, supernatural for me. Double degree in engineering and marketing, of course I should become the CEO. And that's exactly what happens. So what's the first thing you do when you become a CEO or new leader of any company, corporation? What did they teach us at school? What do we need to have? A strategy, of course. And here I could excel. I could sit in my new corner office and I did 200 PowerPoints about the total success of this company going forward. But this is where it hit me. Have you ever thought how easy it is to add customers in Excel? It's a brilliant tool. You can just add whatever you want and you can get all the graphs going left to right and it's magical. But this is where I came to the conclusion. The only thing the owners cared about was actually growth and sales. I spent 5 years at the university, I had no clue around sales, so I panicked and I thought, let's go back to my books. I must have skipped that important lecture. So I flipped through my books and this model comes up in a lot of books. It must be shit important because it's everywhere. What is it? It's the BCG growth share matrix. Thank you, BCG. Do you think I got the star company? No. Do you think I got the cash cow? No, this company wasn't making money. What company did you think the CEO gave me? He gave me the dog. What do you do with the dog in this model? You divest, you kill it. Thank you, BCG. That didn't help me at all because I was stuck in that quadrant. But luckily, I found A. Akers' SWOT model. How many here have done a SWOT model? Great, let's put Jonas Kjellberg in here. 25 years ago, what comes out? Still quite predominantly, actually. A lot of weaknesses. But the company, so this didn't help me at all. And I tried a lot of things, but the company was still going sideways. And it was really going bad. And in the end, I had no place to turn to, so I panicked. It ended up, I called my father. And he was very surprised. He said, Jonas, you've never ever in your life before called me for advice. You must be in a really shitty position before you picked up that phone. You had it all figured out with all your university diplomas and everything, huh? Ain't helping you now, is it? No. I need to understand sales. Okay, cool. Well, I have an old friend, he started as a sales guy. He's now the CEO of NCR, one of the largest companies in the US. He's coming over for dinner next week, and you should join. He can maybe tell you things around it. So I was super excited to meet this guy. And when we meet, the only thing he gives me is a small brochure that says 100 knack, 10 snack, ett tack från en framgångsrik Electrolux-försäljare. And that's in Swedish. It basically says you have to knock on 100 doors, talk to 10 people before you get one yes from a famous vacuum clean sales guy. And I'm like, what? You misunderstood. I'm the CEO. I do the difficult shit. And he's just, read it, you'll figure it out. And this was the first time I came in contact with anything, defined as pipeline model or whatever but I was a mathematician. I loved engineering. And this was the first time I understood. You do 100, you talk to 10 people, you get one yes. You do 200, you sell more. It's not complicated. Sales is math. It's just engineering, It's basically, you can talk more, how do you increase frequency? And I must say, this was one of my first learning curves ever. Because in all the companies I advise, I would say, one of the biggest challenges for most of the entrepreneurs is how do you unlock growth? Innovating in growth has become one of the biggest challenges, because if you want to be a unicorn, you want to be successful, this is one of the most important challenges, and it is a math game. And with all the technology around the corner, I would say you would need to innovate in putting your best engineers of unlocking growth, because it doesn't matter if you have the best product in the world, if you can't get it in front of everyone, you're going to have a hard problem. And then some of you say, okay, Jonas, sales, what does that matter? You know, it's not that important. But I would say as an entrepreneur, you need to sell to investors, you need to sell to new personnel, employees. You constantly need to rethink, how are you going to acquire more capital or more customers? So that was my first learning. And that was great, because after this, I started a telco company. I sold it to Vodafone, started another telco, IPO'd it. My life was perfect. I was the best goddamn CEO ever. The only thing I did when I came in was, how do I increase frequency? Then I get the call from a headhunter, wondering if I was interested of becoming the CEO of a company called Lycos. Does anyone remember it? What was it? Yes, it was the world's third largest search engine in the world, only surpassed by Alta Vista and Yahoo. But she was a bit suspicious in the beginning. She said, Jonas, everything what you've been doing is like super successful, you have a great CV, but you know, have you ever made any failures in your life? I'm looking for that kind of, and I'm like, I'm the worst failure ever, but I'm really good at hiding it. But she was still a bit skeptic. But I got the job. What do you think happened the first day I started there? Yes, a shitty little company in Palo Alto was founded. Google. And now Lycos was owned by Telefonica, and Bertelsmann had an enormous amount of money. What do you think, you know, the board of directors does in this big German company when a shitty small company is founded in Palo Alto? Of course, nothing. And when you can't do nothing anymore, what do? Then we started making fun of them. They don't even have a business model. How will they ever survive? Then we panicked. Then we brought in McKinsey. And they told us everything's just going to be fine. But we couldn't really get out of that feeling this was not going great, you know. So the board said, maybe we'll so we sent our best M&A lawyers over to see if we could buy them. What do you think the German M&A lawyers came back with for recommendation? No business model, no proven market, asking price ridiculously, and they're not making any money, just burning through cash. So we ended up not buying them. Google talked about always delighting the user, and this was totally new for me. My life had always been always delight the shareholder. But things were not going well. So it ended up, I went to, you know, the chairman of the board, Christoph Mohn, and I said, Christoph, they're killing us. We need to think outside the box here. And then he just looked at me and said, Jonas, there is a reason we have the box. And that is because you should be inside the box and not outside the box. Otherwise, we would not have the box. Of course, stupid me, you know. Then Google said, you know, content is king. And I said, no, sales is King Kong. And I just pushed my sales throttle, took frequency to a total different level. You think it was a success? No. It was an epic failure. Epic. Listed company, drove it down the drain, not very good. So the interesting thing, what did Google do? They delighted the user. And basically, I often call this, you know, why should the customers care? You need to bring something which is interesting, and Google did. So what did they do? They just made a better product. And that's not fair if you're a simple sales guy like me. They delighted the user. So when I say the word delight, what comes to mind? We have taken this hierarchy of needs. How many here know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Ah, cool. Basically, this works the same way. You know, on the bottom you have functionality and efficiency, and on the top you have delight. I can give you an example. Alfa Romeo has always had a very strong delight in design. The problem here is if the car doesn't go from A to B, the delight falls. I don't know, is there any Alfa Romeo owners in here? Not many, maybe some Ferrari owners though. Maybe a lot of McLaren though, but. The challenge here is here, and we can take another example. This company had a very strong delight. What was it? Safety. What is it today? Chinese. The best Swedish engineers couldn't figure it out because during a period of time, they added a lot of safety features and customer satisfaction increased. But what do you think happens when all cars are as safe? It becomes a functionality. And this is the problem for all incumbents, is that what you believed was your success, tomorrow is a commodity. And through my job at BCG, I meet a lot of board people. And I'm surprised how much time and energy they spend on only trying to figure out efficiency and functionality, making more money today. I go to entrepreneurship events like this, and it's all about trying to understand what is tomorrow's delight. How do we innovate beyond? How do we think different? But this is really hard. It is difficult to see tomorrow's delight. Why should people care about your new product that no one knows about? But you need to think beyond. I can give you another example. Harley Davidson was also facing quite difficult challenges during the 80s. New competition from Japanese motorcycles, cheaper, better, faster. Harley Davidson actually went into Chapter 11. The board needed to think, how do we rethink our delight? Because what we're doing today is not working. So they went away and came up with this slogan that still stands. What we sell is the ability for a 43-year-old banker to dress in black leather, ride through small towns and have people be afraid of him. And this is our innovation intent. It was not about riding, a bike from A to B, because this was about $10,000 US. It was about being an outlaw 30 minutes a weekend. It's like, think about doing a SWOT. Okay, which customers love us? Hell's Angels. Okay, there's only one problem with that. They never pay the bills. Okay, we work on it. But how do you take a weakness and reposition it into success? Because if you're a startup, you need to have a very strong perspective. What is that friction-free storytelling that you are going to talk about? Why should people care? And I had the great opportunity to have Stefan Persson, the founder of H&M, in my board. He talked very passionate. It took him 10 years to figure out H&M's delight. Until he one day decided, from today on, we're going to be a fashion company with a zero less on the price tag. If Gucci has supermodels, so do we. If Yves Saint Laurent is on Fifth Avenue, so are we. If Prada takes $300 for a pair of jeans, we'll take 30. But from today on, we're a fashion company. And everyone said, you can't be a fashion company and act like a fashion company with a zero less on the price tag. He said, we're going to redo the whole thinking of supply chain, but we're going to act as a fashion company. And they started their magnificent journey, which has been like super successful. Stock price has been, last 30 years magnificently. Then there's another company that starts after and increases even faster. Which one? Sarah, Inditex. What's their friction-free storytelling? We're first with the latest. Because when H&M was all about getting costs down for their supply chain, Sarah said, let's increase it. so we can fix the turnover time. So what we can see on New York's runway, we'll have in stores in 3 weeks. And they grew even faster. Then I said, I'll invest 400 million euro against H&M by investing into Zalando. Do you know their friction-free storytelling? We dress code. It's a tech company. It's all about trying to understand what are you going to buy. It has nothing to do with fashion. But when I was in the board, I went to the board and I said, you know, maybe, could we do something beautiful on the front page because everything looks like unproportionately ugly. And then a former colleague at BCG, she just looked at me because she was the head of fashion. And she just said, Jonas, never ever underestimate the bad taste of Germans. Because for her, everything was just about trying to understand what are you going to buy. There are like 16 different products, and if we don't know anything about you, we don't have any data, we will sell you a cowboy boot in plastic for 5 euros. So, I talked about the importance of having frequency. I talked the importance of having a great delight. Why should the customers care about your product? What will make a difference? But I think the biggest important challenge is innovating in your business model and rethinking it. Because if you really want success, this is where you need to excel. You can put it in more consulting words like this. It's about growth, it's product market fit, and then there is business model innovation. So I'd just been at this huge failure at Lycos. So I thought, maybe I should call that headhunter back. And said, you know, you were worried before that I hadn't really made any failures. But now I've been the CEO of this listed company and it's now totally gone and destroyed. And she said, Jonas, when I was talking about failures, I was more hoping that, you know, you wanted to win the Olympics and you ended up 5th. This is a career disaster. This is a career ending. Please, Jonas, never ever call me again. So I called up some friends and I had the opportunity to meet Niklas Sennström that I worked with at Tele2, and we're a couple of guys that joined this company called Yoltid that later became Skyper, then later became Skype. And the first thing, you know, when we started there is like, okay, how do you price a service calling from A to B? We did it, you know, we played it with technology, and then I said, okay, let's think about how we price it. And then I said, but maybe we should, you know, benchmark how other price for long distance calling has been. Prices have constantly gone down the last 3 years. So I said, okay, interesting. The only logical thing here to do, if we know this, is price the service to 0. And all the others were like, who brought this idiot along? And Jonas, how are we going to make money? I don't know, I haven't figured that one out. The only thing I know is that prices are going to go to 0, so we need to price it to 0. And they're like, can we fire this guy today? And Niklas is like, but you know how difficult it is to employ people nowadays, huh? I'm like, thank you, no. And then he said, but maybe he's onto something. And said, okay, let's keep that hypothesis. If we want to price it to 0, what do we need to do different? And we started the innovation in 0 game. Because if we were going to price it to 0, we would need to rethink how we did our business model. So we said, okay, let's benchmark this again. Let's talk, you know, let's see, what does a telco company do? They invest in infrastructure. So we said, what do we do? Let's use the internet that you've already paid for to transmit the calls. We found our first 0. Second thing, you need a phone to actually code the calls, and telco companies hand them out. And then we said, okay, the interesting thing today is that there was the same CPU power in an Ericsson switch as in a computer. We said, let's use the computer that you own to code the calls. Found another 0. Then to have good voice quality, you know, telco services are racking up Cisco routers around the globe to give really good service. By the way, how many here use Skype? Cool. That's cool. How many used Skype before Microsoft destroyed the product? That's a lot of people. Cool. Can you remember when you had the service on? You went for coffee for 30 minutes, you came back, and your computer was super hot, and your fan was blowing at max? Yeah, you remember. Because then your computer had become a super node, and all traffic was routed through your computer. Because we came to the conclusion, sharing is caring. We understood there was a lot of CPU power not being used in government buildings, you know, big banks. So we just borrowed your CPU power during a period of time. So we had 0 cost for distributing. Customer service. By this time I'd ran, you know, quite a lot of telco companies. I knew customer service could stand for nearly 20% of your cost. And everybody talked about the importance of having great customer service. My challenge was more that after I've talked to Vodafone's customer service, I was often more pissed than before. And I talked to everyone in the team and said, everyone had the same conclusion. You were happy, you called customer service, and now you're sad. So we said, okay, the only logical thing to do here is let's make it impossible to call Skype. We took away our phone numbers from our business cards. We made it impossible to call us. Don't like it? Leave. Marketing. Big telco companies love doing TV commercials, radio, football clubs, whatever it is. We didn't have that kind of money. So how do you excel such a service? Because let's be honest, Skype is a network service. So the more users, the better it is. But it's an inverted network service because if you have no users, no one cares. So we thought, okay, how do we do this? And we came to a conclusion. What happens if we make a small pop-up button after a good call saying, would you like to recommend this service? And if you clicked on that button, since it was a downloadable client, we went in and we opened your Outlook. And then we sent a mail to every one of your contacts saying, hi, I just started using Skype. This is my username, and I would like to talk to you for free. So we sent quite a lot of mails. Imagine when HBC and IKEA started using these services. We sent quite a lot of mails. And people are, that can't be true. You must have been locked down by mail servers and all spam filters. Said, no. It was just one user at a time telling all of their friends that this was a great service. So we had 0 cost for marketing. Do you think that's something you go up on stage and tell everyone? No, you're like, oh, the product is perfect, everyone loves it. We just helped it a bit. So, innovation in zeros. But if you go back, and you think around this, and this is one of the most important perspectives coming out of Harvard, is that many of the most successful companies have all innovated in zeros. It's one of the fundamentals, and it's not about having a low price, it's about innovating on the cost side, because that's, as an entrepreneur, how you excel, by beating the competition, but by taking out cost. Give me examples of companies that have done this really, really well. What are companies like Facebook? No journalism. Alibaba, Amazon. Now the biggest retailers in the world have no inventory. They run a marketplace. Uber. now soon IPOing for 100 billion. You think they must have a lot of taxis on their balance sheet, huh? It's a goddamn app. But they have no cost for drivers and they have no cost for employees. So that's what they get the valuation. What about companies like Airbnb? Now the largest hotel facilitator in the world, they have no hotel rooms. What about a company like Apple? Because let's be honest, if you have a really good product, you can add a 0 to your price and people will still buy it. It's a very good definition that you have a strong delight. Because let's be honest, if you can sell a charging cable for 30 euros, you must be doing something really well. But what more have they done? The App Store. They take 20 to 30% commission and have no development cost. Think about it. They're taking 20 to 30% of Spotify's revenues by rethinking. So if you're an entrepreneur out there, also if you're rethinking this perspective, innovating in zeros and rethinking your cost structure is key. Just go through the list of the most successful companies. You can even take, a company like Google. What do? Every night they go out and crawl the web, download all the content they can find, and then they sell advertising on someone else's content. How did they get away with that one? So, for me, it's a question. Innovate, don't imitate. This is difficult. Can be done. But you need to rethink, what are you bringing to the table to do this? But I think, you need to ask yourself, are you as an individual, your company, are you a game changer? Are you willing to rethink the game by innovating in zeros and building a product that no one has thought about? Or are you just an outperformer? It's fine to be. But again, are you a game changer that's willing to go the extra mile, willing to fail, put yourself out there, or not? And then you say, Jonas, it's great. You come here, you put all your theories. What should I do with this? It's not that complicated. I would say you only have to ask yourself 3 questions. I think Simon Sinek says it really well. What are you selling? To who? And how? But in the end, why are you doing it? And making more money here is not the right answer. I can even ask my son this. He's 12 years old. Philip, what are you selling? I'm selling cookies. Okay, fine. To who and how are you selling them, Philip? I'm selling it to the people that enter the local community train every morning. Okay, fine, seems smart. Why, Philip? Why are your cookies going to be better than all the other cookies in the world? Why are you going to outcompete Unilever and Procter & Gamble? And then he just looks at me and says, no, we have to because we're going on a class journey. And that's okay. And normal parents would have stopped there, but his father can't. He's like, Philip, how have you innovated in zeros in this business model? We talked about the importance of innovating in zeros. You can't start a business without innovating in zeros, So let's go through that. And then he thinks for a while, and he comes to the conclusion, if mother buys the cookies, I make so much more. Yes, Philip, now you found your first zero. Thank you very much. That was all for me. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas Kielberg, a brilliant conversation. Before we continue, we'd like to thank His Excellency Sheikh Khalid bin Abdullah Al Khalifa, Deputy Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bahrain, for being with us today. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
Now joining Mr. Jonas Kielberg on stage, Victor Wang, Vice President of Entrepreneurship of the Kaufman Foundation. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Have a seat. I think they even put your name on.
That was one of the funniest introductions I think I've ever had. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonas. That was really inspiring, and I really enjoyed hearing about your stories. So I love the idea of you framing this as sharing your epic, miserable failures. It's so much easier to talk about failures years after they happened, right? I mean, I think going through them is so much harder.
Yes.
What was it like to actually go through those on a personal level rather than just talking about it objectively with so many years between you?
I think it's always hard because you're always in that state that you want success. It's like, I love the game, it's like a game of football, but and when you lose, you're always devastated. So I think, going through that periods are really tough, and it's still tough, when you can't, hit it off the bat. But I think that's a process, and I think the older I'm getting, I'm starting to learn that these are the elements you need to go out there. And if you're shooting for the stars, you seldom get there. So, the failure rate in things that I do are often, there is no delight, there is no innovation in zeros, it's a free fall.
What was your favorite failure? If you had to pick one out of all your epic, miserable failures, which would it be?
I think the Lycos story is a very interesting perspective because it had all the elements of being a large corporate, taking your first CEO position, really, thinking now I'm going to change the world, I'm going to really take, my brilliance to a total level, and you were totally swept away by a disruption in a very young industry.
It must have been just putting myself in your shoes. That must have been you started at the top and then you watched this thing disappear underneath you. What was that like?
Well, I think it was interesting, but I think I've also been part of other things. There are some stories when we sold companies to Vodafone, but you learn the hard perspective, about preference shares, and you're happy you're selling it, and then you're going through the shareholder agreement. It was like, yeah, this was good for everyone else, but not for me. So there's different learnings, and even in other perspectives of success.
So it sounds like after the Lycos experience, you really probably saw yourself more as an entrepreneur. After that? Or did you still think of yourself as someone that would work in a large company?
No, I think for me, it's not about defining myself as an entrepreneur or a corporate. I've always wanted, enjoy the perspective of working on the biggest and most difficult challenges that corporations have. So I had the opportunity to join. And then I think, it was a bit slump, a bit coincidence, we met up, I'd just been part of this failure. Nicholas had just, been part of the whole CASA perspective, very successful service, but very painful from a financial perspective, having nearly every law firm in the US challenging him for illegal music sharing. And we got together, he was thinking about Skype, he played around with it, and then, we joined, and we said, okay, let's see if we can take it. But my mother was devastated, going from a large corporate job, having 2 kids, and say, are you going back to not having a salary and working, a startup again? Please, don't.
Now, when you talked about the Skype story, the innovating with zeros, I think that's such a powerful metaphor. And you talked about it as if it was all planned out. Like you had these nice graphics talking about how you innovated with zeros. Was it that straightforward in practice?
No, of course it wasn't. I think it was more of a perspective as the first perspective of pricing it to zero was we thought it was brilliant. No one else thought that was brilliant. I think we were refused of all the first top 40 VCs in Scandinavia. they said, you know, guys, how are you going to make money? And we're like, we haven't figured that one out yet. And they're like, great, guys, there's the door. Come back when you've thought about it. But we're like, yeah, but we don't have any costs. This is brilliant. We can scale a global product. But I think it was one by one. You know, you do that, and then, you know, you figure the perspective out. Then, you know, the whole thing about making your computer into a super node, because we couldn't afford buying, you know, servers. Is, you know, it forces you into that direction.
So you're kind of forced to make these choices, one by one.
Yeah. Same thing with marketing. You know, it's like, it's not the first thing you think about. It's like, okay, we can't get this service off the ground, so let's use your email client to send message to all your contacts if you click a button, because we have a downloadable client.
It sounds like you really had a thesis in mind, but how you got there required continuous iteration. It worked itself out over time because you had no choices, but it wasn't so obvious every step from the very beginning.
No, and I think today you look back and think that this service was great, but we were fighting, you know, MSN, you know, Messenger, AOL, all of these messengers that said, you know, they're also going into voice. So we were really, really cautious about maybe joining forces or finding, you know, interoperability and so on, because we were really scared that we would not be able to compete ahead of them.
Because they were racing fast.
They were racing fast, and they were Microsoft that had, you know, numerous amount of money, that had a user base that was gigantic.
Yeah, I remember when Microsoft rolled out, AOL rolled out a call service, but it didn't seem to catch on the way Skype did. What was the difference? Why was Skype able to keep its users from switching over to these other services?
I think we had better voice quality because since it was a peer-to-peer network, it only enabled we didn't have to have servers in China, because, you know, if we used your computer to actually route the calls. So we could use the processing power close to the calls to actually make better calls. But these were more traditional. They put, you know, voice over IP gateways in place, and then you have to call through that gateway. And if it's far, the latency is not really great.
So the cost structure is higher, there's more latency.
Yeah, so by doing that, it was also a superior product by doing the peer-to-peer technology. And that was something that Niklas developed during the Kazaa period. And that was also what Yoltid was doing, selling that peer-to-peer technology.
That's really interesting. This whole idea of innovating with zeros, as you were talking about that, I was also thinking about how economies should be innovating more with zeros. Like we talked a little bit about setting up corporate entities, and some places it's easier and some places it's harder. And a lot of the government people working here have been working on trying to streamline government processes. How would you apply that idea of innovating with zeros to, say, building an economy that's helpful for entrepreneurs or startup companies?
Well, I think it's about, you know, trying to rethink the conventions. And I think, you know, if anything could be zero, you know, if it's starting a company, if it's employing people, you know, how do you put a framework so you can still control diversity and the rules that you want? But I would say it's more going from a fixed line thinking where you have the intelligence in the middle and you have dummy phones. But I think the internet is you have all the processing power is far out in the edges. So it's more about thinking around that. Instead of having one central governance that controls everything, how do we set the rules and then letting everyone else apply the rules? So everyone that wants to join and does that on the premises, it's okay. But it's a different mindset, it's a different thinking, because that's often not how we're done. And maybe you shouldn't do everything at once, but maybe, you know, in small steps, rethink that.
I mean, you said a different mindset. In some ways, you're just trying to predict the future and then trying to get there ahead of time, right, and get there faster. That idea of, you know, it's always struck me, why should it cost anything to start a company, right?
Yeah.
But it's heading that way.
Yes, it's heading that way, and I think, you know, and there should be the same thing, you know, why should it cost anything to start a hospital? Or, you know, what's the Uber for hospitals, you know? What's the Uber for education? What is the Google? How do you rethink that perspective?
Here, you can apply that thinking to almost the entire economy right now.
Yes. But it's very hard because before no one had seen what could be done in a taxi service. You know, it's been around for thousands of years, and then someone still innovates in that industry. So how can that be applied in different industries? But that, you know, that puts the power of the economy and licensing. Taxis is typical. You get the license to operate, you know, you get the stamps from the governments, you get the meters and all of these things, and then you should rely on a governance body that this is how we do business.
Yeah, as you were talking about all of that, I was thinking that the whole concept of innovating with zeros, people use the word platform, but really platforms are just ways to allow people to move in frictionless environments,
Yes.
right? And that idea of a platform can apply to anything right
Yes.
now. What are some ideas of ways people could think about innovating with zeros and building these platforms even beyond what they thought of before? You said, taxis, they weren't thinking of taxis 10 years ago, they weren't thinking of hotels 10 years ago, but now the costs of those are moving towards zero.
Yeah.
What's left?
Well, I think you have the whole healthcare perspective. There's enormous of challenges in the healthcare industry. So it's more like, what areas could you enable this kind of thinking? Why should you have to wait in line? Why should it be so expensive to go to see a doctor in the US? How can you build a framework where you can still control standards, but make it accessible for everyone?
So you could have Uber for medical service, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you need to have such rigid formulas for that? Yeah. You've been involved in. You said you've been doing these events. You've been teaching at Stanford. You've had a wide perspective on entrepreneurship throughout the world over your years. What makes some places so much better at it than other places?
Well, I think it's an heritage, and I think if you go to Silicon Valley, it's maybe the ground zero of entrepreneurship. But they've had quite some years in building these companies and thinking. So for me, I can see very clear perspective in Europe, and you can definitely take countries like Sweden and Estonia. When Skype exited, that gave a lot of people the opportunity to get some money and start new companies, and it puts a positive spiral, because as soon as something exits, you have 200-300 people that want to start their own company, and they start a VC firm, they start funds. So it's more about getting that positive spiral going. So that's why it's super important to do the small celebration of the small successes, but then building on that.
Would you say that's what's made Silicon Valley successful, is the building of that positive spiral over a long time?
Yeah, but I think there's a lot of combinations. They really had the Silicon graphics kind of companies come up early on, and that spiraled into, the whole doing all the computers, and of course that spun off a lot of money that enabled people to grow another fund and exited a lot of people to go further.
Yeah. So so many people here, their mission, their work is around supporting entrepreneurs, making it easier for entrepreneurs to be successful. What can they do? What would your advice be to people trying to help entrepreneurs? What can they do to be more successful at helping the entrepreneurs in their economies and their communities?
Well, I think first there's the mindset shift of trying to understand being an entrepreneur. You don't have to be it for life, but I think everyone should try it once in a while in a lifetime, and starting something, because it's really fulfilling. It doesn't have to give you a lot of money. So first is society saying, great, go away and do that. We'll support you, and we'll fund you, friends and family will, we know that the success rate of this is super limited, but it's an interesting perspective to try, because you have to try. So I think that's from a perspective of friends and family in the society. Second part is, I would say, I think the government has a role in funding and putting up funds of funds. I think, in Sweden we have a very cool thing called Almi, which basically, in the first seed phase, they will actually grant you 50% of capital that you can access from somewhere else. They can only match. They can never make an investment decision. They say, okay, if you have external investors to invest this much, we will give you additional 50% during the first seed phase. Just to show that, they feel that they'll get if this becomes a successful company, they will get taxes, they'll get money back. So it's a way for them to fund this instead of funding unemployment or something. It's more like, we'll just match.
So government has a role in providing sort of risk capital environments.
Yeah.
Because the early part of starting a business it's hard to get that capital.
But they don't make the decision themselves. They're not saying this is a good idea, this is bad ideas. There's, okay, someone willing to invest will, just, back that with the additional 50%.
Yeah.
If you can't get external funding, we're not going to fund you.
So I've got one last question for you. You mentioned you have a 12-year-old son. I've got a 14-year-old son. Do you want him to be an entrepreneur? Why or why not?
I think he should definitely be, and I think it comes down to I think I have 4 kids, and they're all different. I think, you know, my oldest son is 19 now, he'll definitely be an entrepreneur because he has that mindset. I'm as a father trying to push him to the university, at least, no, please do 5 years, it's going to be great fun. And then I have, you know, another son, and he's more like, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a corporate lawyer, this is what I want to do. And then it's like, okay, it's your life, you need to live it. But I would urge all of them to actually do something they really love and enjoy, and then also not decide today what you're going to do tomorrow. Try something, you know, be a corporate lawyer if that's what you want to do, and then turn around and do something else. You know, you don't have to do one thing in life. I'm still struggling to find out what my next thing is going to be. And my mother still thinks I haven't grown up, and I don't have a real work, and I don't have a business card, and when are you going to get a real job? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know yet. I'm sorry, Mom, you know, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Well, when you figure it out, promise to let us know.
Okay.
We'd love to hear it. Thank you, Jonas. Really appreciate you being here. I am going to share some thoughts now with you. So I want to thank Jonathan and the whole team for letting me talk with you here and share some reflections on what has been an amazing Global Entrepreneurship Congress. So I have 5 themes I want to share with you. I've been active in the events all yesterday. I've been listening to people, talking to people, and I've also been involved at the Kauffman Foundation, where we support and we see this activity happening across the country and even the world. And so I wanted to share 5 observations, themes, trends that I'm seeing in this work. And I'd love to share them with you with the idea that I'm going to be around for the rest of today and tomorrow and the day after, and I'd love to just hear your ideas on this. So I'll start with these 5 themes. The first theme is this. When you look at all this work that's happening in building entrepreneurship and ecosystems, we are really reinventing economic development. And that is actually something we've seen across the board through our work. So at the Kauffman Foundation, we've actually built a summit now with over 600 people from across the United States who are focused on really looking at new ways to do economic development in their cities and communities. We've actually built a playbook online on how you can do this. But this is not something we're doing to push on other people. We're actually responding to what's coming out of the field and responding to the messages that we're hearing from the practitioners who are on the ground. We've also worked with our friends in the International Economic Development Council, and what's happened really interestingly in the last year is they are developing courses and training now on entrepreneurship ecosystems. So this is now what's shifting from economic development to actually looking at building entrepreneurial ecosystems from the ground up. And so we've got this blend now that's happening as we're actually crossing the line between entrepreneurship ecosystem building and traditional economic development. And that's a trend that we're going to continue to see. And this goes to this idea of innovating with zeros. That barrier is breaking down between what we think of as traditional ecosystem work and then traditional economic work. I had a really interesting conversation with Tatiana Krylova from UNCTAD, and she said 4 years ago, this has happened very quickly, 4 years ago, people asked her, well, what does entrepreneurship really have to do with the economy? That was actually a question credible people were asking her. And now the shift has happened where entrepreneurship, the building of ecosystems for entrepreneurs, has become one of the top issues in developmental economics. And so this is a trend we're seeing, and we're seeing it continue to accelerate. So we are reinventing economic development, and we're going to continue to see that trend in the coming years. The second, number 2, key theme I'd like to share with you is that ecosystems are here to stay. It wasn't that long ago, those of you that have been around in this work, remember just a few years ago when you talked about ecosystems, not everybody understood what you were talking about. Some people still don't understand, but more and more people understand. That is becoming a phrase that's actually quite commonly understood now, both in the entrepreneurship sector, but now increasingly in economics and government. People are thinking of building ecosystems, and there's starting to become a basic understanding of what that word means in a larger sense. Now, when we talk about ecosystems and the fact that ecosystems are here to stay, it raises this other question, which is this new way of thinking, what does it really mean? And I hear some people still talk about ecosystems as just a replacement for another word. They might have said cluster before, and they'll say ecosystems, or they might have said sector, and they'll say ecosystems. But those of us that are really enmeshed in the work know that ecosystems means something different. And what it really means is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The interactions, the conversations, the relationships between people in a community, in an economy, actually create value. And so that shift has been really interesting to watch as people start to use the word ecosystem more and more. And so the question then is, well, if an ecosystem is about the relationships and the whole, then how do we build ecosystems? Because you can't build the whole thing. And so the analogy I use is to talk about the difference between planting farms and rainforests, natural ecosystems. So when planting a farm, which is not a natural ecosystem, you just plant lots of crops. You know the crop you want to build, grow, you plant one type of crop, you try to do it as fast and as cheaply and as efficiently as possible. But if you're trying to build a natural ecosystem, like a rainforest, how do you build a rainforest? Do you just plant lots of trees? Do you just plant lots of plants? No, it's the whole environment. And you build rainforests by affecting the environmental conditions. It's the temperature, it's the sunlight, it's the water, it's the nutrients, it's the interaction between the plants and the animals within that ecosystem. So we shape that, and we learn how to do that through this work around ecosystems. And so we're seeing lots of projects, lots of really great ideas happening from high-tech parks. I heard this at the ministerial yesterday. High-tech parks, IT training, mentoring programs, regulatory reform. But they all point to this issue, which is that building ecosystems is actually a challenge not of building something. It's not a what problem, it's a how problem. That is, it's a design challenge, because the design of a high-tech park can be the difference between a successful one and an unsuccessful one, because it affects the ecosystem. Because we're actually looking at not designing the high-tech park, we're not looking at designing the mentoring program per se, we're actually designing the human relationships and the interactions within that. So how we shape the relationships and the behaviors of people in an ecosystem is actually the ultimate goal. And we know when relationships and behaviors are affected and culture starts to shift, that's where you see the ecosystem born. So within Kaufman, we've been doing some things around this work. We've actually have an entire team working on ecosystems at Kaufman. We actually have several members of that team here with us in Bahrain. But we've been doing work on e-ship communities. So we've actually picked a few cities in the United States where we're going in deep specifically to build the ecosystem. And it starts with just a series of conversations, deep discussions that last for months and months, because people have felt left out for so long. And so this process of talking to people and pulling them into a conversation opens them up. And when you open them up, then you can bring in more people, and you can bring in more people. And so that process of ecosystem building really is a process of conversations and building relationships. I was impressed, someone from Estonia had mentioned yesterday that they think of the ecosystem work they do is they're not trying to make government more efficient, they're trying to make markets. And I think that's a really interesting perspective. We're actually shaping the markets in which people interact and compete and build together. So there was a lot of discussion, Jonas was talking around delighting people with the product. And so when we look at ecosystems, what we're really trying to think of is how do you delight the user of your economy? So we don't talk a lot about users of economies, but the citizens of an economy, the people that are creating businesses within your economy, they're the users. So what's the user experience? What's the UX of being a creator in your economy? So that's the kind of thing that we're hearing people talk about more and more. So that's the idea of ecosystems are here to stay, and ways of thinking about ecosystems are becoming part of the work we do. So number 3, the third big trend, is a focus on the human elements. We heard this a lot yesterday, is people would say, well, you know, that fund didn't work because we had to start with the human elements. Or that legal reform didn't work, people didn't register because we had to start with the human elements. People don't trust the government, or they don't trust this program, or they don't understand this new program you've designed. So the human element of how people interact with something is really important, because it gets down to these little things, just like Skype. He was talking about just sort of how people feel when they use Skype and the relationship they had with the product, the ease of using the product. Well, those barriers are little things, and removing barriers creates a more inclusive environment because people feel like they're included in that product, and allows you to optimize your economy. So what happens in economies that are under-optimized is you're actually taking talent and people and leaving it on the table. You're actually not taking advantage of what you have. So the design of interactions, the communications between people, and the culture that underlies that. So one of the really interesting things about ecosystem building, and you see this in your own economy, you probably recognize this, two people can sit next to each other and not even know each other, and they might as well have a country between them. So even putting people in close proximity doesn't break down the social barriers, the walls of distrust between people. So when we look at focusing on the human elements, our third trend, we're really looking at how do we get people to trust each other, who wouldn't otherwise trust each other. How do we get people to work together who wouldn't otherwise work together? So at Kauffman, some of the work we've been doing actually sounds a lot more like community building than it is necessarily program development. But that's really it. We're fusing together community building skills with the programmatic work. I noticed that in the EU, there's this Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs program, and they found that light touches, low-cost programs actually can generate cross-relationships and build the success of entrepreneurs. Number 4 trend. This was really interesting to me. The number 4 trend is that deep reform is actually happening right now. And I saw this a lot yesterday with some of the programs I heard different countries were working on. I was impressed with the work in Argentina. They've changed their legal system for incorporations, for people starting businesses. They've reduced the cost by 10 times, so now it's 1/10 of the cost to reduce a business. It used to take 8 months sometimes to register a business. In Buenos Aires, they're down to 15 minutes to register a business. And that's beating the record. I think Estonia was saying they could do it in 18 minutes. And in Argentina now they say 15 minutes. So I think there's a race that's happening now, which is how do you streamline the systems across governments to actually get the cost of business registration down to 0. This idea of innovating with zeros again. In Malaysia, I was impressed with hearing that they're regulating entrepreneurs. Right now, it's 60 different agencies in Malaysia cover entrepreneurs. They're putting into single agency. So they're actually causing government reform to streamline the entire process for how you be an entrepreneur. You don't have to work with lots of different places. You can just work with a single one. In Bermuda, they have micro-lending programs where the government backs microloans, and they're seeking to remove the payroll tax for the first 1 to 2 years of a business. In India, they have a 3-year income tax exemption for startups, free patent filing, rebate costs for patent processes. And part of the work of the Global Enterprise Registration, Tanzania is putting everything for registering a business onto a single website, creating a single window. And El Salvador was doing something similar, creating a simple accounting system for all businesses to pay their taxes. These are serious efforts. I think people often don't realize how momentous this is, but just a few years ago, and I've been doing this work for a long time, you would not have heard about that depth and that magnitude of that kind of reform that's happening. And what that points to me is that we're actually shifting the system. So the system in the past focused on large enterprises and how to make large enterprises more successful. And what's happened is we've shifted it to figure out how do you make little enterprises, it could be a one-person business, how do you make it really, really easy where the cost of doing that work gets as close to 0 as possible. That is a big shift in philosophy and mindset and reform, and I just wanted to point out how momentous that is. At Kauffman, we've got a project on capital access. We're starting with an idea of trying to reform the capital markets in the United States, and I'll talk about that this afternoon. I have a GEC talk. We call it the Capital Access Lab, and we've been inspired by the work 30, 40 years ago of the YOSMA program in Israel to look at what's the next phase of capital look like. How do we look at creating new forms of capital that are neither venture capital nor are they traditional lending? Can we create new forms of capital using new technologies, new hybrid models, and can we create experimental laboratories to test that out? So I can, if you're interested, I'll be in the GEC talk talking about that this afternoon. So my 5th big trend, and I wanted to share this with you, is that what's very clear in all the conversations I've had with so many of you is that ultimately we're human beings doing this work because we're driven by a sense of purpose. I found that in every single person I've talked with. There's so many other things you could do in your lives, but you've chosen this particular work. And so there's a deep sense of purpose because we feel like we're actually helping people that need it. We're making a difference in our societies, in our communities, in our economies. And people doing this work, they tend to work harder. They just tend to put in extra effort, more than in almost any other field you can imagine. because people really are passionate about this work. And I find that's very amazing because usually when you think about people working to try to improve an economy, most people don't tend to associate that with passion and drive. But I found from this work there absolutely is. There was a great quote from Felipe Buitrago of Colombia yesterday, and he said, "Those who take risk deserve the support of those in the comfort zone." And I think in many ways the people who are in this work, we actually could be in the comfort zone, but we choose not to be, and we push ourselves out into the realm of risk so we can be with the risk takers. So this is actually noble work, and I'm very proud of the people that are associated with it. I had an interesting conversation with Winston Wilkins from Jamaica. He talked about how they were focused on teaching coding skills to youth so that they could get social mobility, because the ability to code was such an important part of the lives and the potential economic well-being of their citizens. Again, that passion, that drive. I'll give you a little story before I move to the final thing I'll talk about here. One of the really interesting things about America is how open society is. Those of you that have had time to spend a visit to the United States. And one of the things that people are often surprised by is one of our former presidents, Jimmy Carter. He lives in a town of about 700 people, Plains, Georgia. If you go to Plains, Georgia on any Sunday, you can actually just walk into church and actually go to church with Jimmy Carter. And he'll teach class. And so you can actually meet a former president of the United States very, very easily, and anyone in the world can do it. And I did it last year. So I went and met the president, Jimmy Carter, and he gave a little lecture about the world and the role of people within it. And he actually cited Tolstoy. So Carter was a bit of a philosophical president, which was an interesting thing to have. But he actually cited Tolstoy, and he said, the thing about what Tolstoy said is that the world hinges on the actions of ordinary people. It's not the kings and the princes and the queens and the princesses or the big CEOs that ultimately shape the future of the world. He said this is a direct quote from Jimmy Carter last year. He said, "It's about small people. The course of great events was determined not by the czar, but by the actions of ordinary people. We as individuals collectively will decide the course of the human race." And so I carried that with me, and I wrote it down because it affected me quite a lot. And I thought I'd just share that gift with you here today. So we've got 4 minutes here, and I want to do one final thing. So in the spirit of how ordinary people shape the course of human history, in the spirit of ecosystems and sharing, I want each of you to close your eyes we're going to close our eyes for like 20 seconds. Close your eyes for 20 seconds. And I just want you to relax for a bit. It's a lot of information, it's a lot of stuff to take in. And think about a challenge that you're facing in your work now to help entrepreneurs. Think about something you're struggling with. Think about something that's really been, it might be something that you're dealing with. It's really difficult. You don't share it that much, but you know you really care about it and you want to find a way through it. Do you have that thing you're working on? Okay. So here's what I want to ask you to do this. This is a favor to me. So you can open your eyes now. So that thing you have. So I want you to find someone you don't know here, and this is the house rules. Find someone and just agree that you're going to keep this confidential. But this is something we do at Kaufman, which is we ask, how can we help you? This is part of the spirit of entrepreneurship and part of the spirit of ecosystems. And actually just share your problem. So find someone you don't know and say, we agree it's confidential. Share your problem, and you'll each share your problem. And the job of each person is to say, how can I help you? And it could just be as simple as, I just want someone to listen to the problem. Or it could be, I've got some advice. Or it could be, I've got someone for you to talk to. Or it could be, I've got a website to share with you. Something simple. This is actually the heart of what we do at Kaufman, is we actually build relationships and get people to activate with each other like this. So I'm going to ask you to do this, and I'll do it myself if someone wants to come share with me. I'm happy to do it as well. Yeah, you will. Okay, great. So we'll do that, and with that, thank you very much. Thank you for being part of this, and please enjoy this chance to share with someone you don't know. Okay? Thank you. Thank you.
Cash from Pakistan, Jan Pakistan.
Yeah.
So the moment you said that.
Thank you, Victor Wang, the Vice President of Entrepreneurship, the Kauffman Foundation. We now invite you to adjourn to parallel sessions already in progress.